Today we're going to talk about a star fort in New Mexico and also talk about solutions to our modern predicament pertaining to the law. But first, let's look at 5 melted building pics. And here I want to look at a few examples of melted buildings as we open. Here is a classic Native American narrative. We're told they carved into the rock and yet built this kind of stuff. And here what I want to show are these sections. Section, again. You can clearly see these vertical lines and these blocks seeming like concrete, long rectangular sections. And here we see a horizontal line of where they've fused together, and this one was popped open, perhaps originally a door. And if we look down here, we have an opening, and we can see other such areas, thin rock curtains waiting to be popped out, and a lot of signs of the remains of a building. Now this one, similar and clearly melted, absolutely amazing, and we can see how the dripping, and this is a great example on how a rock curtain would form. Any more, and this seals itself off, similar as seen here, and this too could just be popped out. A very thin rock curtain, and this is in New Mexico, at the Bandelier National Monument. And here a beautiful wonder. This one is in Colorado, the Garden of the Gods, and at a first glance, maybe seeming like rock, but when we look carefully, we see very odd things, like this piece resting on this column, and perhaps this was a little skyscraper, and these little blobs were windows or openings, and this place got hit real hard, and perhaps it was made of something metallic. We see chunks that have just turned into blobs and re-solidified, and absolutely amazing. In Colorado, true cathedral-like spires revealing a story of the past. And real quick, I thought I saw a massive bird over on this side, but my eye playing tricks on me, looking like some hawk gazing into the distance. And let's move on to our final 2 pics. These are melted stairs. Same place in New Mexico, Bandelier. And the narrative actually tells us that they're stairs and that the Native Americans wore these grooves into the rock with their bare feet. And lastly, these stairs found in Egypt, and again displaying melting. And when zoomed into these stairs, in a better photograph than this, we can clearly see the swirling and melting of this material and flowing right down the center. And that was 5 pics. Welcome. And what do I mean when I talk about the sanitizers of history? Here we go. Fort Union National Monument. I've shown it before. This is the monument in which we can find this old world star fort. Off to the side, just a little trail here leading to it. No mention of this star fort in the narrative here, because this star fort doesn't fit in the narrative. This is clearly something from the old world, and we've seen thousands of examples of this exact star fort. Of course, there were so many different patterns, and typically having giant walls and buildings and waterways flowing all around them. And to see this out here in the desert, and again with no mention, even at the very monument in which it sits, only hinting of some primitive Old West, and really doing a poor job trying to make it look like some old adobe some mud, and really these are all bricks, and they're trying to disguise the beautiful brick with this clumpy mud. And let's have a little look at this city that they're trying to portray as a mud city. What do we see over here? We see a perfect layout of a city. And today I'm proposing that this may have looked like the World's Fair, and we're simply seeing the foundation and some walls, and this place has been completely wiped out. Take this spot for example. Perhaps there were two massive buildings with two courtyards with access out of the courtyard on each side, and here we see some plug holes which must have been some glorious fountains and ultimately part of the tech. And so when I do go visit this Starfort very soon, I'm going to want to pay particular attention to these spots that still show up pretty clearly, and not just some random holes, clearly some plumbing, and we can see a few other examples of that. Here again, a very faded one, very faded, even less remaining. We can tell by the shadows, just a few pieces of wall, but nevertheless we see the outline of the two buildings, two courtyards, access out on either side, and once again, a plug hole for a fountain, and another one, and it looks like someone's been digging on this one, and this one is going to be close to the visitor center, almost seeming like we can access it without going to the visitor center, possibly bypassing the fee. And what's going on here? Again, it looks like there were some fountains, and I do propose that these were massive buildings, and they have cleaned everything up, and we're just seeing the faintest husk of what actually existed out here. We can also see signs, as I've shown before, what looks like raking of the earth. And with the condition that this Starfort is in, totally buried, I imagine that much of what was up here as well is also buried. And perhaps these are just the tops of the walls. And I look forward to bringing a little small shovel and digging a little corner of this Starfort out. That will be the key, is revealing some of this ancient block work. And I encourage everyone to go out and send me pictures if you get there before me. And was this a building? Perhaps a block or two fused together, almost unrecognizable. And this is in New Mexico. I thought we'd look at a few others. This is El Morro National Monument. And again, I think all national parks and monuments are concealing something. Here's some petroglyphs that they would tell us are thousands of years old, when they really look like a few hundred years old, if that. But here as a refresher, I wanted to check out Bandelier Monument. We've looked at this in the past, and very much seeming like a melted building. Here we can see that. Pretty obvious that this was not carved by the Native Americans. Absolutely beautiful picture, strange as that is. And here we can see a great face of a building, and everything in front of the building seems like fused bricks. Uncertain, but I look forward to going to this one. But today what I want to show you is one very similar called, here we go, Puyi Ruins. Let's have a little look at the Puyi Ruins. Again, all this in New Mexico, and here we go. All of this is said to have been carved by a people. And if anybody had the ability to carve into this stone, imagining we took the narrative seriously, why carve it to look like it's a melted building? And here typically they put ladders just in case the mind gets any ideas contrary to the accepted story. Of course they're able to carve into a mountain, but must rely on a primitive wooden ladder. And this is mind-blowing. Located in the northern part of the state. And here is a good example of something I'm always talking about, how this stuff in front of it is actually just junk, not impressive, and very possibly just built by the WPA to detract the eye from this obvious building behind it. And once again, if you could carve into a mountain and procure dwellings, why would you even bother with something like this junk? And here's some petros, possibly made by the WPA as well. And here's the picture I wanted to show you. And let us read their caption. Steps worn into the rock. Oh yes, what kind of feet did these people have wearing such grooves? No, this again is a great evidence that this rock or stone or at one point concrete has now turned to putty before re-solidifying. This looking like the cart ruts of Malta or even Kingman, Arizona that I showed once. Very fascinating. Do we live in a simulation? How would we know? Some of the first signs to lend that we might be in a simulation is the maker of the simulation would spend more time on the present and the believability of it than the past. The past would be full of inconsistencies and anomalies. And currently I'm watching the show Westworld after so many recommendations. And is it possible that the first man and woman created were simply in a simulation and they were tested? Their program was tested. As long as they didn't question anything, they would have everything they need in this perfect environment. But of course, a creator would want to test his subject. And perhaps some kind of base programming is necessary. Something to anchor us and give us purpose in our new reality. But naturally, this would have to be tested, and a rule would have to be made to see if it would be broken. And perhaps breaking a rule is the first sign of consciousness. When I look back at the old photos, the earliest photos of the people, it seems as if they're dumb, running a program. And then of course there's the controllers, and we can tell the difference, especially in the old photos. Do we exist to serve? Is this all a big test? Are we the only ones in the realm that are becoming aware of this? Of course I don't know, just some thoughts I thought I would share. It's said that it's better not to begin, but once begun, it's better to finish. And where is all this research leading us? I think to understand our false history is very important, but ultimately that brings us to our false present, which is even more important. But I think one step lends to the other, and perhaps an important prerequisite before we can consider how we should really live. And how should we really live? A lot of people will spend a lifetime blaming others, especially in this case, blaming the controllers it might be. Oh, look what they've done to us. And they have. But complaining about it is only good to a certain point. We have to consider our next step. And if we don't take the next step, there's no one to blame. Yes, when you realize the system is completely backwards, and we're no better off than slaves living in this glorified feedlot, full of amusements, but also unnecessary burdens placed on life. Burdens that even the wild animals don't share. Certainly when you realize history is false, you wouldn't pay for a false education and indoctrination. Some people spending hundreds of thousands on such a worthless piece of paper. And time. But how would you live if it was completely up to you? If nobody was stopping you? Some would enjoy to continue the rat race, such as my family, even if presented with this knowledge. But personally, I would choose to live as naturally as possible. I would want to eliminate the high expenditure and cost of living wherever possible, and mostly this is housing, power, and food. Nothing mysterious about it, and anyone can jump off grid and eliminate at least 50% of the madness that we are conditioned to accept as normal. But even if you were to do that, how free are you? What's left? I typically preach independence and not fighting with others. But in this case, it's the very same system that will come after you. We, of course, have God-given rights in most presumed free nations, but the lawmakers create new laws which seem to directly oppose our God-given rights and our most foundational documents of law, including the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And suddenly we might receive a nasty letter and feel drawn into the system. And we are. And what do? Comply? And we're taught in law that we must comply. This is an honorable position. We must respond. And this idea of law and freedom is the heaviest research in my life. And I think the most important because it will teach us to navigate these treacherous waters that we seem to be drawn into every now and then. And so recently I was sent a nasty letter threatening taxes, jail time, fines, tearing down of my house, and all kinds of other things. But all threats, all assumptions, followed by accusations. And at first, being like most of us, I thought I would just pay, and was more than happy to just pay and be left alone. But upon reading the letter further, there were all kinds of suspicious words, questionable words, threats backed with no facts, and very simply things that I didn't understand. I did not understand their position. And my natural inclination again would have been to pay, but I also realized upon further contemplation that this paying would also be an admittance to anything in this vague letter I was sent, opening the door for many other subsequential issues. And I don't know much. I wish I would have spent years researching the law. Instead, I've devoted my time to history. And yet I can clearly see that one, in a practical sense, is more important than the other once we've woken up. So I decided to use what little knowledge I have and apply it. My conviction rooted in my God-given rights. And I wrote a letter, and I thought I would share it. It's not everything I wish I could have said, and as always, I wish I could have said it better, but I said something. And maybe we'll discuss that in another time. Right now I want to look at a Starfort in Buffalo. And I think I'll post that whole video on my Off Topic channel. I just want to conclude with a new Starfort that was shared once again with Dustin Berserker Bear. And here, tucked away in the corner of Lake Erie, we have a Starfort. And this one is new to me, and perhaps it will be to you as well. And here we go. Really looking like she's taken a beating, and the faintest outline remaining, but nevertheless, here it appears to have a little entrance, and this wall is still in really good shape, seeming to have some grass growing over it, but I think a lot can be explored, and very exciting. And what else is absolutely fascinating right around this region is this complete yin-yang of terrain. Here a fully built out city like a circuit board, like a grid, absolute skill in engineering and abilities for such an early time period. But what a stark contrast when we jump across here. We would think that this is somewhat primitive. So this would be on the northern side of Lake Erie, and this old civilization did not mess around. And let's just put all preconceived ideas aside and just observe this canal. And this baby's massive. I mean, you can see it from way up here. Not just some small canal, but this thing is major. And we start out with just ruins, mining, once again. In the most pristine and choice part of this city, the city planners found it appropriate to essentially have a dump right here. And I don't think so. I think that this is the erasing of history right here. And just this little end piece or pier gives us an idea of how advanced this was. And I believe all down here will be ruins, probably massive blocks, and most of it being cleared out already. Just seeing the slightest imprint. But again, back to our canal. Let's just follow this little canal, or this massive canal, and here you go. And again, this is just what would seem like an uninteresting part of Canada, and really absolutely fascinating. This canal, and I'm sure we're told it was built in a very early time period, is right up there with any natural wonder. To conceive of such a feat of engineering is completely overwhelming, even in this time period. And I think a lot of these roads have simply been filled in. These may have also been canals leading in all different directions. And here we can see how all of this has been carefully planned. Take an area like this. There's no reason for running this canal through this bit of landmass. Or even here, cutting a small access, not for commercial applications. And yet, that's exactly what we see, even here. Absolutely advanced engineering. And we know all about swamplands by now. A dead giveaway. And it goes on, and I think you can hide a lot of our history, but these canals are smoking guns. And this is the end of the video, and I think we'll just scratch the surface today. Well, that's it. I thank you for joining me today, and do have a blessed day. Please like, comment, and subscribe.